Return to WrestleMania these days is considered the peak of pro wrestling. Like, seriously, what else in sports entertainment can you do to trump it? I mean, people have been champions and people have 5-star matches, but only a few individuals can say they closed the show at the show of shows. I said show too much. It has become incredibly important to the industry, and wrestlers will happily tell you, I've dreamt of this since I was a child. And I tell you, when you get that build and execution right, it's as real as it gets. It also usually serves as the end of one WWE season as we go into another one. But as we're going to do today, when you do go through all the main events of WrestleMania, well, it certainly is a mixed bag. Now, obviously, box office is always going to be the number one thing we throw out there, but as the business has evolved, you also have to get your working shoes on, and that's just what people expect. It is important to note that before we talk about the first WrestleMania, though, because do not forget, the last match there was Hulk Hogan and Mr. T taking on Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. That is the most WWF thing ever. Now, I guess from a match perspective, it wasn't very good if you want to use those kind of words, but in terms of mainstream appeal, people couldn't believe this. They're like, wait a minute, Mr. T from the A-Team, B.A. Baracus, is going to team with Hulk Hogan to take on these two dudes? What the flub are we doing? It's kind of crazy too, though, because when you shift forward to WrestleMania 2, that's not the same at all. I mean, technically you had 3 main events here because it was broadcast from 3 different locations. So you had Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy in a steel cage, the British Bulldogs versus the Dream Team, and of course Mr. T taking on Roddy Piper in a boxing match. Look, that was always doomed to fail. You were taking 2 people who weren't boxers and then putting them in a worked boxing fight. I mean, I think some people had just seen Rocky 3 and decided that was enough. Wasn't. We then shift forward to Mania 3, and what many people will tell you, and they're probably right, this is where it all changed. Because the idea of a WrestleMania moment was certainly born when Hulk Hogan did slam Andre the Giant, even though he weighed 4,972 pounds. Now again, the match today from a modern fan perspective would perplex individuals, but if you are getting over 80,000 people into a stadium, well, you've done something right. The tennis effect for these contests keeps on going though, because when you get to WrestleMania 4, well, it's just so confusing. Look, it's awesome that the Macho Man Randy Savage finally got his due, but the whole thing is one big tournament. Some of the booking is so silly. Even in 2024, you just go, that was nonsense. This was kind of backed up with the buy rate too, because it dropped from a 0.8 to a 0.65. Everyone had the worst reaction to this. It was basically shrug emoji. I think that's likely why WWE went all in with WrestleMania 5, because we had the imploding of the mega powers, which is a narrative that many say is still one of the best ever. And my word, we built it over a year. It's the same for WrestleMania 6 too, where management just took 2 of their biggest babyface stars and pitted them to get each other. And if you were a kid at the time, this was unimaginable. It's like Batman take on Superman. How did we get here? And it's only fair to say that Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior mostly look at each other in this match. But I don't think that's an insult. Once again, it kind of just sums up what the WrestleMania main event can be. If you've got enough star power and pizzazz, well, you've sorted the whole thing. 1991 did see it fall away again because somebody decided it'd be a great idea to tie the main event into a real-life war when we got Hulk Hogan retaining the WWF title or winning it back against the Iraqi sympathizer Sergeant Slaughter. You know what, the less said about that, the better. 1992 also continued this trend because it was Hulk versus Sid. There is actually one major reason to watch this. There are so many mistakes in it, you won't believe that it's the WrestleMania main event. I mean, nobody would accept this in 2024. To be fair, I don't think they accepted it then. WrestleMania 9 absolutely continues this insanity because, of course, you kind of get 2 main events here. In the first one, Bret Hart loses to Yokozuna, when Hogan just walked out, demanded another match, and for some reason, Zunes said yes. And look, this is considered so appalling, when something similar goes down today, people still talk about WrestleMania 9. I think the powers that be must have clocked onto this come WrestleMania 10, because we finally did have Bret Hart defeating Yokozuna. But littered throughout this, you also had the stories with Owen Hart and Lex Luger, and while a little bit is off the key, ultimately, when you do get to the end of the event, you're like, oh man, that felt like a big deal. It just felt like we weren't focusing on the random nonsense as much, which means, of course, 12 months later, all we got was random nonsense, with the main event being Lawrence Taylor, the NFL player, taking on Bam Bam Bigelow. Now look, this is always going to be an acquired taste, but once again, if we do go through the history books, look how WWE deals with celebrities now. It kind of started then. I mean, financially it did bomb, but it certainly pricked up WWE's ears. And every single year since, they tried to do something similar. The rest of that card was a little bit lackluster though, which I also think inspired WrestleMania 12. Because to really show that WWF could be a working man's company, we had Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels for the World Championship in a 1 hour long Iron Man match. Now look, from today's perspective, this does divide people, but it was a total 180 from what WWE had done in the past. And I, for one, am quite a big fan of it. I think the real takeaway should be what we said at the end of this, which is the boyhood dream has come true for Shawn Michaels. What does that sound like? That's right, a WrestleMania moment. By Mania 13, the entire company was lost as it tried to find a new direction, which is why we did main event with The Undertaker versus Sid. Honestly, it's just the most forgettable match, and I don't get it. Of course, slap bang in the middle of this was also Steve Austin versus Bret Hart in the submission match, one of the greatest matches of all time. When we got to WrestleMania 14 and 15, it was the Rattlesnake leading the charge, and while the match against Shawn Michaels is slightly disappointing, when he took on The Rock, we basically invented the blueprint. I mean, go back and watch it now because it does feel like the most important thing ever, which is why when we got to WrestleMania 2000 and Austin was injured, we were just trying to come up with all the shenanigans, and that four-way main event, it kind of feels like a Raw match. Nothing really needs to be said about WrestleMania 17 either, aside from the fact, ever since, WWE has been trying to replicate it. It all poured into WrestleMania 18 because Star Power had taken over, as we did have Hogan versus The Rock, and in hindsight, everybody knows the deal here. Chris Jericho versus Triple H should never been the main event, and that also sums up what WrestleMania has become. Even if the championship is on the line, if you've got two dudes that transcend everything, put them in the last flipping match. Mania 19 and 20 kind of straddle both those lines because you did have good matches with famous workers. WrestleMania 21, when you go back and look at it now, was a major success and headlined by Triple H and Batista. And do you want to know why I think that one did so well? Because once again, we invested in the story. 22 was all about Star Power 9000 because it was Triple H versus John Cena. Then we essentially did the same thing with 23. We just took trips, we flipped him out, and we brought in best buddy Shawn instead. Mania 24 is also another step forward because Edge versus Undertaker was a very worthy main event, but when you go through the whole damn card, I mean, you had the emotional wreck that was Ric Flair versus Shawn Michaels, and you had the other match, which was Triple H versus Randy Orton versus John Cena. I mean, that would headline any card. 2009's effort will sadly be remembered thanks to a great build and then two people that had a blood feud locking up. Still doesn't make any sense. And by Mania 26, we were saying goodbye to the Heartbreak Kid. He smashed it again with The Undertaker. The Rock returned to WWE in 2011, and that was greeted by so much joy. Even though we finished the whole thing with John Cena versus The Miz, that still did over 1 million buys. And of course, The Rock was back for the next year and the year after that, even though the first one against John Cena was described as once in the lifetime. And now here you really start to see the direction WrestleMania was going. If something worked and felt like box office, we were just gonna do it. Taglines be damned. You think this would have been an easy jumping off point for WWE too when we got to WrestleMania 30, although we did try to flub it up, but ultimately it did end with Daniel Bryan with both those championships aloft. And I think once again this was a learning curve. Sometimes you can have the best laid plans. If the fans want something different, give it to them. WrestleMania is meant to be a happy time. Now, WWE's failure to learn from this did mean over the next 3 years, we got Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns versus Triple H, and Roman Reigns versus The Undertaker. And of course, this continued at Mania 34 when we went back to Brock versus Roman. Now look, actually when you watch it, it was so hard-hitting, you did get invested, but that finish, man, just went to show you how scared WWE management were of actually pulling the trigger. It was starting to get ridiculous. And also, WrestleMania at this point wasn't finishing any stories. That had always been the point. It also feels very similar to WrestleMania 35, which of course was historic. So we did Ronda Rousey versus Charlotte Flair versus Becky Lynch, but there were still some asterisks here. One, why wasn't it just Becky versus Ronda? And two, why did this whole show have to go on for 97 hours? I was there live for this and it still gets me. We're never going to talk about WrestleMania 36 again, although it did give birth to something amazing. 2 nights of WrestleMania. And I'll hold my hands up, I was totally wrong. I thought this was a bad idea. But by 2021, we'd already totally established that spot because, of course, on that Saturday night, we got Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks. And this is something that we should all be obligated to watch at least once every 6 months. It's an emotional roller coaster. I even like what we did on night 2 because, of course, Roman Reigns did stack up Daniel Bryan and Edge. But knowing what we know now, well, it was always going to happen. 38 was a Steve Austin show, so don't you even pretend that was a bad idea. Now, this is the message that WWE sends out there every single year, and it does work because they can pack a stadium before they've even announced one single match. But actually, when you do go through all these main events and you kind of canvass people on the internet, it really does come down to 50%. So half of them really like what we've done. The other half think that WWE ballsed it up. So it certainly does have an uneven track record, but to be fair, has it made a blind bit of difference when it comes to the specialness? Not really. In fact, I would go as far to say that as of right now, it is bigger than it ever has been. And by the time we get to WrestleMania 50, it will be even bigger still. Like, I know it's somewhat of a marketing quote, but WWE has become a beast in entertainment. Because this is their jewel in the crown, well, now everybody wants the spot. That is the beauty of WrestleMania, my friends, in the sense that it can absolutely not deliver at all, and we still hold it in a very warm place in our hearts. I mean, the rest is all sort of window dressing, to be totally honest with you. Now, of course, please do click the video on the screen, which is all about the best main events in WrestleMania history. Like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Leave a comment below, and share your own favorite WrestleMania memories. I'll see you soon.